Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. On today's show, we're going to discuss what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
So we're recording this on Tuesday. Jacob is still sick. Are you feeling any better, Jacob?
I am operating at about 70% today, so I'd say that's an improvement.
We're recording this a little earlier than normal, so that we can get you before the meds hit. So
yeah.
So,
Sudafed time a little bit later on. So
yeah. Okay. Let's start with what we've been doing. This week I went to DreamWorks Animation in Glendale. They have this beautiful campus, which seems like an oasis, hidden between the concrete of Los Angeles. And I interviewed the filmmaker of the How to Train Your Dragon series, Dean Dubois, and about the new film, The Hidden World. And that interview will hit the week of release, which I think is next week or the week after, something like that.
It's next week, yeah.
Next week. So yeah, look out for that. I did. We talked about last week on the podcast. I was answering a question about tracking movie or how we track movies, and I mentioned that there isn't a good way to track TV shows, and I got a ton of responses. We'll probably read in a later edition of the mailbag, but a lot of them seem to suggest this website called Tracked.tv, and that's TRAKT.tv. I'll link it in the show notes. And this is basically like Letterboxd for TV. There's a bunch of apps that they're not like Letterboxd where they have a Track TV app, but there's a bunch of apps that they make their API open for anybody. So there's a ton of apps that are using their API. But I spent a couple days going through the history of every TV show I've seen and marking it as watched or rating it, and this app is very cool. It does almost everything I like that Letterboxd does, and it's at the end of the day you can actually look at how many hours of TV you have watched total in the history of your TV watching. Yeah, they give you fun things they'll do a year in the review showing you all sorts of stats of what you've seen that year, but it will also give you your all-time totals. So far I haven't probably logged everything I've seen, but I've spent a considerable amount of time on here. I've watched 10,840 hours of television. And that's almost 19,000 episodes.
How many of those are your repeat watchings of Cobra Kai?
Oh, I didn't log watchings. So
it's worse than that.
Yeah, it's much worse than that. That's just that's too much work, Brad. That's too much work. But apparently the show that I've probably watched the most is Shark Tank. 300 episodes? 250?
Yeah, that's ballpark.
Yeah. Anyways, I am derailing this podcast. Brad, what have you been doing this week?
So, following in the footsteps of Chris recently, I decided to revamp my movie shelving system. I've had a media shelf for some of my movies that I've held on to actually since college. It's been relatively durable this entire time. And then I had a new one that I bought a couple years ago that wasn't quite as good as I hoped, but it worked for the time being to house my collection of movies together. But in the most recent move, I noticed that they had become a little bit flimsy, and I really didn't like the idea of using them at my new residence. So I decided that I was going to get some new shelves. So inspired by Jacob's barrage of Billy shelves that he has from IKEA that perfectly house his movies and TV shows, I picked up a set of them from IKEA in order to house my movies. And then it also caused me to kind of change how I keep them organized, because since I previously had two media shelves that easily housed both my Blu-ray and DVD collections, I kept them separately. So I had one was just full of my Blu-rays, the other one was just full of my DVDs. But now that I have these 3 new Billy shelves, it was much easier for me to just combine the Blu-rays and DVDs into one massive collection. So it took some time because, first of all, I had to move them from my office where they were just stacked up on top of shelves that I'm still waiting to get full of other things. So I had to bring them to the shelves, and then I had to go back and forth between the Blu-rays and DVDs in order to alphabetize them properly because I alphabetize my movies. So that was a long, tedious process, but it's worth it. I like the way that they look on the shelves.
Wait a second. Do you put TV and movies together?
No, the TV shows are still separate, but I don't have a huge, anywhere near as big of a collection of TV shows as I do movies. I have significantly fewer TV shows than I do movies, so those will be separate, probably on like one of my Calyx shelves that I have from IKEA. But yeah, so I like the way it all looks now. It makes the library look neat and orderly. And it also allowed me to kind of purge my collection a little bit because I had like 10 or 15 movies on DVD that I had rebought on Blu-ray, but either forgot about or didn't realize. So now I'm getting rid of those DVDs. And then I also went through and kind of reduced the number of movies that I had a little bit because as I went through, there were some movies that I owned that either I bought like in order just to watch them instead of renting them because they were cheap, or that I've just accumulated over the years from either a friend giving them to me or something like that. And they're movies that I wouldn't really see myself like watching and being like, oh, I really want to see this again right now. So I'm getting rid of like another stack of maybe like between like 30 or 40 movies that I just don't need anymore.
Okay. And you also went to a birthday party?
Yeah, so 2 of my friends had birthdays this week, so another friend of mine planned this little get-together where we went out to dinner in this it's kind of like the banquet room of a restaurant here in our town, and put together this Bob Ross themed birthday party where it was like, you know how they have those wine and canvas things where you go and you drink wine and then paint with your friends. This was kind of like that, but it was just us, a group of friends doing it. And so we each had like a little canvas, and we watched a Bob Ross video and tried to replicate it. And it just reaffirmed what I've known for years since high school, which is I'm a terrible painter. I'm not too bad at drawing, but when it comes to paint, I cannot get a grasp on the properties of color or brush techniques or anything. I was trying to do what Bob Ross was doing, and it was terrible. It was this picturesque mountain landscape with trees and a lake and clouds. And it started off kind of okay. We were using oil paintings, which is also a little difficult because they're wet and it gets hard to blend them. And eventually I just went rogue and turned my mountain into a volcano and put lava on it and everything. So it was real bad.
Brad, have you posted a photo of this painting on your Instagram?
No, definitely not. I did take a picture. I have not posted anywhere, but it's kind of embarrassing. But maybe I will post it.
People want to see this.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. HT, what have you been up to?
I went home for the weekend for Lunar New Year celebrations. So Lunar New Year was about a week ago. It was on the 5th. So I went home on the weekend after to indulge in some festivities and lots of great Lunar New Year food. In Vietnamese, it's called Tet. So I didn't have any celebrations when I was here in New York, but I ended up my mom has instilled in me some superstitions that I try to uphold a little every year. So there's like you have to have a clean home and a clean self when the new year arrives, or that it will accumulate in bad luck and stuff. So whatever you do on the new year, the day of the new year, will basically indicate what your luck will be for the rest of the year. So I'm always a little bit cautious whenever I do something on the new year. I remember my mom when I was young would ask me to not come home at midnight of the new year because otherwise I would be the first person in the door. And the first person in the door is usually the indicator of who will be the indicator of what your luck will be as well. It's like if they're a good person, they'll bring good luck to your home. And apparently, I was not worthy of that. So she'd always be like, "Get home before midnight. We're having your uncle come be the first person in the door" thing. So I went home and
I don't get this, HT. Like, are you bad luck?
Apparently.
This is
because I asked her why, and she's like, "Well, first of all, you're always late to things." And I'm like, "What does that mean? I'm like an unlucky person?"
I feel like this is traumatizing.
I know, but I mean, with my apartment, I was the only person who could go in and out, apart from my roommate. So I was the first person for my roommate. So we'll see how the luck holds up in my apartment this year. Who knows? But yeah, I went home and just had lots of great food. We exchanged those, red envelopes that you might have seen that contain money. And I still am getting them despite being an adult with a job now. So I'm very happy. I'm still getting them from my parents and aunts and grandma. So those are usually also supposed to be a bringer of good luck as well. And when I was young, it was my only source of allowance. So now I have income and this lucky envelope. So it was a great time overall, and I was just happy to see my parents and relatives again for the new year.
Very cool. Ben, what have you been up to?
I had a chance to visit the Warner Brothers lot on Friday. I saw some early footage from Shazam, which is DC's upcoming superhero movie. I wrote a big thing about that. I got to talk to David F. Sandberg, the director, and Peter Safran, the producer, in like a group setting. So maybe we can link that in the show notes and people can check that out. That went up on the site yesterday. And then on Monday, a week ago, or actually a little bit over a week ago now, I went to the LA premiere of a new movie called The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot, which is like one of the most ridiculous titles that you'll probably hear this year. This movie stars Sam Elliott as the titular man who does this. It's set in like the late 1980s, and it's got sort of like an alternate history. He actually does kill Hitler, and that's how World War II ends. But in this world, his act was sort of covered up by the government. So everybody else who's living in this world thinks that the war ended the way that it did in our world. But then years later, he is called back into action to take out the Bigfoot in Canada because this creature is posing a biological threat to the world. It sounds way more ridiculous than it actually is. The title and the premise sounds kind of like this pulpy grindhouse kind of movie, and it's really not that. It's a very slow, poignant sort of meditation on aging and it's a very strange movie because the title sets you up thinking that it's going to be one thing, and it's totally not that at all. I got to talk to Sam Elliott a little bit right before the movie started, and he basically told me, like, yeah, the trailer is not indicative of what this movie actually is, because the trailer sort of makes it look like this action-packed thing with Sam Elliott like running through the woods and hunting Bigfoot, and that happens in the movie, but it's a very, very small section of the film. So anyway, the movie is tonally sort of all over the place, but
who would have expected that from the title of the movie?
I know. Elliott gives a pretty good performance, and he was a really nice guy, really great to talk to, and he's nominated for an Oscar right now for his supporting role in A Star Is Born. So it was cool to get to talk to him and to be there, and I'm a big fan of his from going all the way back to movies like Tombstone and obviously The Big Lebowski and a bunch of great stuff that he's been in. So that was my Monday last week.
Very Ben, cool. I have a question about this.
Yes.
About 2 years ago, I spoke to a South by Southwest programmer who said they turned this down because they could not justify playing a movie with that title, with the tone that it has. They thought people would turn on it in a harsh way. Was there a reaction to the movie like this at the premiere? Like, what was it? What was the vibe of people like reacting to what's a very straightforward drama that has that title and premise?
I wish I could have seen it in a film festival environment to get a genuine reaction, but because it's a premiere and like Sam Elliott and his wife were there, and I think his whole family, actually his daughter was there as well. A lot of the people who were making the movie were there, and like the executives and stuff. So when it was over, people in the theater were just standing up and, congratulating each other and being like, oh, that was so great. And like my wife and I were looking at each other like we felt really bad because we didn't like the movie that much. Even though everybody involved with it seems really nice. It's the debut film of a first time filmmaker. And it seems like it has its heart in the right place. It's just sort of a tonal mess. And I think the reaction would have been a lot harsher if the audience was full of quote unquote real people, a genuine audience. I'm almost certain the people at South by Southwest made the right choice, because people who would go into this movie really amped based on that title and the fact that Sam Elliott is playing a badass would definitely come out of that movie with a case of whiplash for sure.
It's always the worst experiences when you go to a premiere, like a cast and crew screening or premiere, and you're like the one group in there that didn't seem to like the movie. Like
I know. I feel bad.
I remember a few years ago at Sundance, one of the, Kevin Smith was there with yoga hosers, and at the time we didn't know what kind of disaster that was going to be, but it was one of the big films of that year, and I had to it was almost impossible to get a ticket, and I pulled some strings, and I got a ticket from one of the cast and crew that was there. So I was sitting, I actually was waiting in the green room with the cast and crew and stuff before the movie, and I was sitting in their section during the movie, and then after the movie, the composer and all these people, what did you think? What do you think? I was like, it was not very good.
Yeah, tough.
It feels bad. You have to pull. My trick is always when someone asks me what I think and they're involved, I'm like, what's the one positive thing I can say about this movie?
Yeah, and Sam Elliott's performance is pretty good. I would recommend, though, that if you're looking for a good late career Sam Elliott performance, in addition to his work in A Star Is Born, check out this movie called The Hero that came out a couple years ago, because that one there wasn't too much chatter about that, but I think he's a little bit better in that film, and that's maybe a little bit better movie all around.
Let's move on to what we've been reading. This week, I have been reading Juan Tamariz's The Magic Rainbow. For those of you who don't know, and if you live in America, you probably don't, Juan Tamariz is probably the greatest and most respected magician alive. He's a Spanish magician. If you go to Spain or South America, he is, the biggest thing there. He's actually a part of that pop culture in a way that no magician is over here. And over his career, I think he's probably rounding out his career now. He's written 6 books that have been translated into English, which are, honestly, I think 5 out of the 6 books are considered the greatest magic books of all time. So he has been working on this book called The Magic Rainbow for the last, I think, 10 years or something. The book is 600 pages long, and it's finally been published and translated into English, and I've been reading that trying to get through these 600 pages. It's very dense with magic theory. It's a magnum opus of magic performance theory, and presents essays and explanations and revelations and insight and analysis. And some of it is very grandstanding stuff, and some of it's very useful. But I'm excited to get through this thing, because I have sitting on my shelf a book from Blake Harris, one of our contributors, his new book, The History of the Future. Jacob, I hear you actually have this book as well. Have you started reading it?
Yeah. Disclosure, real quick. Once again, as I did when we talked about his previous book, Console Wars, Blake has written for Slash Film. I don't know him in real life, but I've edited his work. We've spoken via Twitter and email, which is why he sent me an early copy of his new book. So, with that said, if I didn't like this book, I wouldn't be bringing it up. So I flat out just wouldn't mention it. But so far, I really like The History of the Future. This book is very similar to Console Wars in tone, except that instead of following the war between Nintendo and Sega in the 90s, it is about the spectacular rise and even more spectacular fall of Palmer Luckey, the creator of the Oculus Rift, the VR headset that was going to change the world about 5 years ago. And if you follow video game news or tech news at all, you probably know what went down with Palmer Luckey. He built a VR headset in a trailer when he was 19 years old, college dropout. A couple years later, his company was bought by Facebook for $1 billion. And then he made some decisions that are so spectacularly stupid that it just undid him. It destroyed him. It destroyed his career. It put VR on life support. I mean, VR is still around, and the Oculus Rift is still actually the best headset, but it's a Greek tragedy in the amount of like crazy stupidity of rise and fall that the history of the future tracks. And
although, from what I understand, this book is going to show us a little bit more of his side of things and how.
It is very much like Console Wars. It is written like a novel or a screenplay. It has that sort of immediacy to it because what Blake Harris did was he did all the usual interviews and tons of research you do for a book like this, but then he attempts to recreate scenes and recreate conversations, sort of condense things in a way a film would. So instead of like saying this is what happened on this day, he will write that scene as a conversation between two people and try to get across all the information as a dramatic scene. And some people didn't like those Console Wars. I think it reads really well, and it reads like it reads the with the pacing of a TV show or a movie. It really reads like The Social Network Part 2, which makes sense because Mark Zuckerberg is a huge character in this book. And Palmer Luckey, knowing what he ends up doing, haven't got that part of the book yet. Like I walked in this book thinking, man, he's such an idiot. He's such a friggin' moron. I can't wait to like root for this guy's downfall. But he's just a really, really dumb kid. He's a really, really smart, really, really dumb kid who does some really stupid, idiotic things, and it puts a face on a guy who became like this figure of like scorn and a laughing stock. And I don't think ever Hope doesn't forgive him. I'm at that point yet, but it definitely helps you understand what kind of person he is. And I'm very excited to keep reading it. I'm trying to pace myself. Like I blitzed through Console Wars, his previous book, and that book is just an absolute blast. And this book, unlike Console Wars, which is ultimately about people who are really good at their jobs, doing the right things, and who I ended up like really falling in love with, some really nasty, bad people enter the narrative of the history of the future, and they become really heavily involved in the story in ways that I'm dreading because I know what kind of people they are. I'm talking about like the alt-right movement plays a part. You know, Mark Zuckerberg and all the Facebook shenanigans, Palmer Luckey's future decisions. I am dreading watching Palmer Luckey's downfall from this personal perspective. It's like hurting my soul knowing that where I am in the book right now, where he's rising so high, is going to crash and burn in a way that is going to like leave scars on an entire industry. It is a fascinating read.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Blake Harris got like for the first time ever an unprecedented that Facebook gave him unprecedented access to basically go in and be in Facebook and interview anybody and talk to anybody he wants and, you know, get access to emails and whatnot. So I'm excited to read this because it seems like it's going to be a very insightful look into that company and this, you know, this small space and time. HT, what have you been reading?
I have been reading Dracula by Bram Stoker, diving back into the classics again. This is a book that has been sitting collecting dust on my bookshelf for a while, and I was kind of actually wanting to dive into Dune next in preparation for the feature film, but I wasn't able to get a copy. So I was like, you know, might as well just read Dracula. It's been waiting for me. And it's so good. I've always been particular to the gothic horror genre, rather kind of the romance section of that. Jane Eyre, Rebecca, those were a lot of my favorite books growing up. So it's really interesting reading something from this genre that's from a distinctly horror perspective and angle. And I'm only about a third of the way in. I've gotten to the part where Jonathan Harker has spoilers for anyone who does not know anything about Dracula, escaped Transylvania with his life. And it's surprisingly action-packed, which I did not expect. From my experience with Gothic horror and the Gothic genre, usually it's quite a slow build, but here it kind of dives right into it. And a lot of the action doesn't really take place in Transylvania, surprisingly. So it's for those who don't know about this story, it tells the story about Count Dracula, who is the sort of root of a lot of vampire mythology and literature. And it's how he decides to move from Transylvania to England to find new blood and spread the curse of the undead. A small group of men and women tried to take up arms against him, led by Professor Abraham Van Helsing. And so this is mostly told through a series of letters and correspondences, which was really interesting, but also kind of a staple of the Gothic genre as well. And it's very good so far, and I can't wait to finish reading it. I know that Jacob was, in particular, quite excited that I took this up. So, Jacob, what do you want to say about Dracula?
Dracula is so good. I mean, I love the old Universal monster movies. I love many of the adaptations, but nobody has managed to capture what makes this book so good. And you hit the nail on the head, HD. It is an action-packed book. There's so much like excitement and adventure. It's like there's a lot of great horror, and it's very chilling and great creepy stuff. But it's swashbuckling at times, and for a book that's written in like the form of diary entries and letters, it's especially interesting because it reads like, "Hey, let me tell you this adventure I went on," and it's really, really fun. And you haven't gotten to my favorite part of the book yet. We'll talk later, but there's a stretch. The final third of the book is the part that all movies always cut out, and it's, my money, the best part of anything Dracula ever, and it is a blast. And I'm still waiting for somebody to look at the last third of Dracula and take that one chunk and make it an entire movie, because I think you could. I think it'll be the best Dracula movie ever, but we'll talk more later on.
Okay.
Very interesting. Chris, what have you been reading?
I recently read this very long CNN article by Thomas Lake called Lost in the Woods with James Brown's Ghost. And it's this in-depth investigation on whether or not James Brown was murdered. And, that sounds crazy, but if you read this piece, it seems very plausible. And, the piece doesn't draw a conclusion one way or another, but it does make a very strong case for the fact that this actually happened.
It does. I mean, I guess it doesn't have any conclusive results, right?
Right. Yeah. There's no here's the proof. It's you have to draw your own conclusions, but it reads like. You? What's that?
Did it convince you that he was murdered?
I really don't know. It sort of did, but at the same time, there's always a chance it's just, a lot of it's like hearsay and coincidence, but there's a very strong chance that it actually might have happened.
I feel like this is the kind of thing that would eventually be turned into like a Netflix documentary.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I had that same thought where like any day now, this is going to become some sort of 5-part Netflix series.
Well, we will link that CNN article in the show notes if you want to check that out. Let's move on to what we've been watching. I'll start things off by saying I rented Blind Spotting on iTunes, and you guys were right. This is one of the best films of last year. If I had seen it last year, I would have included it in my top 10. This is a movie about a man who is in his final days of probation, and alongside his friend, who is basically the embodiment of trouble, are living in Oakland, California, which is being gentrified by hipsters who drink $10 green drinks and eat veggie burgers. The movie is oftentimes hilarious. It's very powerful, moving. The climactic scene, it has these freestyle rap sequences that work better for me than most, song scenes in musicals. I want to see more films like this. There's also a sequence where they're telling a story, which reminds me of kind of like Michael Pena's scene in Ant-Man, and I think it tops that, actually. If you have not seen Blind Spotting, correct that mistake. Go see it. I highly recommend it. I also attended the Junket screening for How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. I love the original film. The second film I remember liking, but I can almost only remember like 2 or 3 things about it. So it has not, its legacy in my mind has not remained heavy. But I saw the sequel, and this is the conclusion to the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. And it's an epic, thrilling, beautiful, and surprisingly emotional conclusion at that. It is, guys, we are in an age of some awesome animated films with Spider-Verse and Lego Movie 2 and this, and I'm guessing I'm probably forgetting some stuff, but this is so good. It's I know, like, the first film, I feel like, was the first time I was in a movie theater and I felt like I was flying. Like, had that beautiful flying sequence. And this film, I think, follows that up with, it might even top it in flying sequences. All the characters have arcs. All of them get their moments. It's also very rare that in an animated franchise that you get to grow up with these characters. Like, I know in Toy Story, the Toy Story franchise, we get to see Andy grow up in the background, but he's not a main character. The toys are basically the same throughout the franchise, and that's a lot of animated sequels are like that, right? But with How to Train Your Dragon, you really are growing up with these characters. These characters are changing and becoming more adult, and it's actually interesting that we don't really get that much in American animated cinema. This is how you do a trilogy. I really hope they don't make more of these because the ending is so perfect. I'm not sure if the bad guy's plan completely makes sense in this movie, but and I guess my only other complaint is the hidden world, which I think you see in some of the advertising. It's this bioluminescent hidden place, reminiscent of like Avatar or something like that. It is such a small part of this film to be named in the title. But aside from those two nitpicks, I really love this film. If you like the first film in this franchise, go see this when it hits theaters at the end of next week. Yeah. And on Netflix, I watched a documentary called Abducted in Plain Sight. This is a 2017 documentary, so this isn't a documentary made by Netflix. This is a documentary bought by Netflix that I know played the festival circuit, and it's a stranger-than-fiction true story of this family, naive, church-going Idaho family who fell under the spell of a sociopathic neighbor with designs on their 12-year-old daughter. It's a very talking head style documentary with these dramatic reenactments, which are presented almost like they're vintage family film footage. The story is one of those stories that, like, every 20 minutes gets more and more nuts, and you're like, there's no way this can get even more crazy, but it gets more crazy. And I don't know, I wrote down here some notes that I was going to reveal, like, even a little bit of what happens in this, but I feel like if you want to see this, you don't want to know, but I will say it involves alien abductions. So you should check out this documentary. It's infuriating. It's insane. Chris, who also saw this film? It was Chris. Yeah,
it was me. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, the less you know about this, the better. But this is infuriating. This is a very upsetting documentary, and it will make you hate just about everyone except the victim, the one victim. Everyone else, you're going to be gnashing your teeth at. So don't expect this to be like, a fun, quote unquote, fun true crime thing. Because, some true crime things, even when they deal with murder, they're entertaining, I guess is the word you can use for it. But this is not that. This is very disturbing, and it's going to make you angry.
Yeah, but also by watching this, the victim gets their due, right? Like, I feel like there's some catharsis in that way. So, yeah. Okay, so you can find that on Netflix. And I also watched the first handful of episodes of this show called Wayne. Has anybody heard of this show?
It's a YouTube show, right?
Yes.
I've seen that ads for it.
Yeah, I had not heard about this show, and somehow I came across it. It is written and produced by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, the writers of Zombieland and the Deadpool movies. The show is initially set in Brockton, Massachusetts, which isn't too far from where I lived and was born. It stars Mark McKenna, who was in Sing Street and Overlord. He plays the title character Wayne, and he's kind of pitched as a 16-year-old Dirty Harry with the heart of gold, who sets off on this road trip adventure with a new girl who he befriends named Dell, played by Sierra Bravo. And they are on this trip to try to get back the 79 Trans Am that was stolen from his father right before his father died of cancer. So it's kind of like this adventure story, but it's has kind of coming of age and heart of like John Hughes movies. It's you can definitely feel the budgetary limitations in the show, like I think you can with any Netflix show or any YouTube show, including Cobra Kai. The characters are all kind of white trash characters that, you know, seem like they've been lifted out of a Jerry Springer episode. So if that bothers you, maybe don't watch this. Every episode has these extremely bloody fights as Wayne is, you know, doing justice to some, you know, fighting some kind of injustice that's happening. And, but it's often like very bloody. The show is full of vulgar language. But I think for me, what I like about the show is at the center is this relationship, between him and this girl, Dell. And it's very sweet. It's like surprisingly sweet for the rest of the movie, or for the rest of the show. I would describe this show as like John Wick meets, Hesher. I'm not sure if anybody's seen that film. By the way of like My Name is Earl. If the combination of those things sounds like something you'd want to watch, I would check this out. This is on YouTube Premium, so I think you might actually have to subscribe to YouTube Premium to see it. A few of the episodes are directed by Steve Pink, who directed comedies like Accepted and Hot Tub Time Machine. And the showrunner, Sean Simmons, did School of Rock and Awkward, the TV series. But I would recommend it. I'd recommend checking it out. I've watched, I think, the first 5 episodes, and I'm gonna finish it. But I feel like YouTube is not promoting this show. It's not amazing in the, you know, we are in peak TV, and I feel like it's hard to recommend anything that isn't amazing, but it's very enjoyable. And if you have YouTube Premium, I would recommend it. Jacob, what have you been watching?
I have not been watching much. My wife's been out of town for a week to visit her sister, who recently gave birth to a child. So I'm an uncle, I guess, for the 4th time over now. So rather than watch movies, which I can do anytime, I decided to devote all my wifeless time to playing video games, which I'll discuss momentarily. But I did rewatch GoldenEye, which is streamed on Amazon Prime, the first Pierce Brosnan James Bond film from 1995. The movie holds up. It's odd. Actually, let me take it back. It holds up and it doesn't hold up in really interesting ways, which is one of the reasons why I love the James Bond movies so much. It's because how they hold up and they don't hold up. And in many ways, GoldenEye is clinging desperately to the old school Bond movies while desperately reaching forward to the future in ways that are fascinating to watch them clash. And this is the only Pierce Brosnan Bond movie that's actually genuinely good. The rest, you know, are either bad or I like with certain caveats. But it's very interesting to note that this is Martin Campbell, who did Casino Royale, which has actually aged, in my opinion, into being the absolute best James Bond movie. He directed this, you know, very serviceable, very good, you know, but wobbly movie in 1995. Then 11 years later, rebooted the series with a straight-up bona fide masterpiece. So it's very interesting to watch GoldenEye these days for many reasons. And also, Sean Bean is incredible as one of my favorite James Bond villains. Also, I watched this a few months ago, and I never mentioned it here. I don't know why. But with the news that Season 4 has been all but announced, I want to talk about, did anybody else know they brought back BattleBots a few years ago? Genuine. Did anybody else know this?
I think you mentioned that in the Slack channel or something.
I think I actually wrote about it maybe when it happened, and that might have been, I don't know if it was before Jacob came to Slash Film or something, but I remember doing something about BattleBots. Maybe I'm wrong though.
Jacob, it's funny because you love all sorts of like competition shows that are not traditional sports.
Yes, BattleBots may be the best of them, Peter. I mean, when I was a kid and BattleBots was on Comedy Central, you may remember this from like the early 2000s. It was a show where people literally built robots with buzzsaws and hammers and hydraulic flippers, and they went to a ring and they fought the robots for 3 minutes, and to the victory of the spoils. And I loved it when I was a kid. I revisited it on YouTube every so often, and the old fights, seem a little tame these days, and it seems like it has a goofy tone. New BattleBots, which is playing on the Science Channel for the past 3 seasons, and season 4 begins filming very soon. It hasn't been officially announced, but they have announced dates for when the competition will be held, and tickets are available, so people are assuming it's going to happen. New BattleBots is fantastic. The robots are more advanced, like they're absolutely killer. They have like so much crazy technology involved, and it's very much these stories of these giant nerds from all different kinds. You have like literally got guys who are like socially awkward, pudgy, pasty guys from the mom's basements. You have like Brooklyn hipsters. You have like really cool teams of people. You have father like daughter teams. You have family teams. You have like people who are NASA engineers, like coworkers. All these various like science nerds have built killer robots, and they come to fight. And season 3 is available to buy on Amazon. I think it's like $25 for the entire season, like 22 episodes. And if you are remotely interested in watching gladiatorial robots, that is more than worth it. That's each episode is an hour long. Each episode has so much going on. The robot combat itself is really fun, but even more fun is the personalities, like watching these people who just want to build robots and then trash other robots with the robots. And it's so rare when people have bad feelings toward each other. Like everybody, like is so happy to be battling robots. Even when they lose, they're smiling. They're like high fiving, their hands shaking. It's such a good spirited, warm hearted thing, and also to see robots destroy each other. Like the robots now are so powerful. Like and the technology being used to build them is so insane. And if you go on YouTube, they have a lot of cut footage from between the fights where like they had to realize, oh, I won this fight. My robot's trash. I have another fight tomorrow. I have 18 hours to rebuild my robot using all these spare parts, and go watch that behind-the-scenes footage that didn't make the episode, which makes it even better. I wish it was actually in the show. Yeah, but BattleBots Season 3, all available for purchase on Amazon. Season 4 filmed soon. And I can't believe how much I love BattleBots. Even my wife, who rolled her eyes so hard, like was hooked after episode 1. So BattleBots, please go watch BattleBots. It's really good.
Jacob, I feel like in a few years from now, we're going to be looking back and we're going to be like, how did the fall of mankind happen? And it's going to be 2 things. It's going to be reality television and it's going to be BattleBots. Reality television, obviously, and, our leaders, and, BattleBots are going to be the ones that take over. These robots are going to become sentient, and all because you enjoyed watching them compete against each other on TV.
Oh, it'll be worth it if BattleBots is that good.
Okay. Chris, what have you been watching?
Last night I saw Happy Death Day to You, which is the sequel to Happy Death Day, and my review is up on slashfilm.com as we speak. And I loved it. I liked the first film, but I was not expecting to love this film as much as I did. It completely ignores the first film's tone, which was trying to be sort of a series, not a series, but like an actual horror movie with some comedy. And this is just a full-blown comedy, which might throw some people off, but I really liked it. Jessica Roth is once again phenomenal. I don't understand how she's not like a bigger star yet, because I honestly think she's a phenomenal actress. She does so much in these 2 movies that it's, she's constantly having to do like physical comedy and regular comedy and drama and just horror. She's basically running the gamut here, and I remain somewhat confused as to how she's not a bigger star yet. But the movie itself is fantastic. I loved it more than the original.
Very cool. What else have you been watching?
I mentioned this before, but I got a very big TV for Christmas, and so I've been trying to rewatch things that demand a bigger screen. And my wife and I realized we hadn't seen Titanic, the James Cameron movie Titanic, in a very long time, and I didn't even actually own it. So I was like, you know what, let's watch this. So I bought it on Blu-ray, and we sat down over the weekend and we watched it, and that movie still holds up. When that came out, it was a huge deal. I saw it several times in theaters, and I know over time it's gotten this weird reputation because of just, I don't know, James Cameron's general jerky attitude. But it's a great movie. It does have some things that don't really work. I think Leonardo DiCaprio's very Italian friend, I think his name is like Fabrizio. He's just awful, where he's just like, I go to America. He's just talking like that. He's like, I love meatballs. It's really like, it's just hammering it home. Like, all right. And then like at the beginning of the movie where, Kate Winslet and her mom and Billy Zane show up, Billy Zane gets out of the car and he's like, there's that unsinkable ship. God himself can't sink it. It's like, all right, like, I get it, James Cameron. You should tone it down just a little bit. But other than that, I really loved it. Kate Winslet is so good in this movie. I think this was like the first time I became aware of her as an actress. And one thing I never really picked up on when it came out, but I did this time and I really appreciated it, is that her character is the one who really like initiates like all like, the romance, which is not really typical for, big Hollywood movies. Like it's usually like the guy chasing the girl, but she's like really doing all the heavy lifting. Even that scene where like they finally, she and Leo finally have sex in the car. Like he's sitting up front acting like a chauffeur, like a jackass, and she like grabs him by the neck.
A jackass.
Yeah. Well, he's in the front. He's like, "Where to, missus?" It's like, "All right, idiot. Like, read the signals." And like, she grabs him by the neck and like pulls him into the back of the car because she's like, "Dude, like, I want to get it on. Stop pretending you're a chauffeur in this car." But I really like Titanic. It still holds up. That's I
have a question for you. What do you think Titanic's legacy is in pop culture? Because I was with some friends over the weekend and we were going over the top films of all time by worldwide box office, and we went. I think we got down 30 movies in that list. Every single one, I think, are films that people like have posters on their walls and walk out. It would not be surprising to see someone with a T-shirt, walking down the street of those movies, or like characters from those movies, except for two movies. One of them is Avatar, the number one of all time, and number two is Titanic. Like,
I mean, I think Titanic definitely has a bigger place in culture than Avatar. Like, I feel like people will still quote that goddamn King of the World thing, but no, I can't remember a single quote from Avatar. I don't know what anyone says in that movie.
Hey, Chris,
this is
Chris.
stupid.
I see you, Chris. I see you.
I also think that there are a lot of people who do own posters of Titanic. So it might not be on T-shirts, but definitely it's a very widespread poster.
I don't know. I just find it strange
it came out when it was re-released. Like, a lot of people saw it and re-released, right? People love Titanic, and I don't think people would flock to a re-release of Avatar.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I don't know.
I hope not.
We'll see with the Avatar sequels. And I'm not saying that Titanic's a bad movie. I actually like Titanic quite a bit. I just find it strange that James Cameron's movies like tend to, like, people see them and like love them, but the only thing you're right. The only thing that we kind of quote is the King of the World, and like, if you're on a boat or ship, you do that thing in the front of the boat.
Those Paint Me Like Your French Girls too.
Oh, I guess that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just wondering, why do James Cameron movies why do they kind of fade in pop culture?
I don't know if they do. I feel like Avatar is the only one that does. Like, people still talk about the Terminator, and they're still making sequels of that. Like, I think Avatar is really the only one, which is ironic because it's the biggest hit of all of them. But for some reason, that's the one that's faded.
I still think the Titanic faded. I remember when that came out, everybody was all about Titanic. But
I disagree with you, Peter. I think Titanic is still so prevalent today. Like, whenever it airs on reruns on TV, I know a lot of people who will just watch it over and over, despite its 2.5-hour length.
But I'm not saying watching. I'm saying like it's part of your everyday life. Like Star Wars is part of my everyday life. Like, even like you get to like the Despicable Me movies and the Minions movies that are in like the top 30. Like, I can't go to a theme park anywhere and not see someone in a Minions t-shirt. Or I can't walk down the street.
But Titanic isn't the kind of movie where you have action figures, or like you're wearing, like there are a bunch of t-shirts about it or anything like that. Like it's not the same kind of movie that has penetrated pop culture in that same way, but I think it's still very much prominent. It's just not in the same way that Star Wars is, simply because there's not the same merchandise push and things like that.
Yeah, it's a historical drama. There's not really the same opportunities for all of that stuff.
But I feel
if they had made a sequel with Rose in the 20s, like trying to raise a family in New York, that would be a franchise, and we can talk about it some more. But that's a pretty definitive ending. Everybody's dead.
Yeah, it's not a franchise. It's a melodrama, and melodramas still have quite a standing. Like you think of From Here to Eternity, for example, and the beach kiss and everything. And that's not something that's on T-shirts, but something that everyone's aware of, despite not having seen that movie. And I think Titanic is in the same boat.
But I do feel like when it came out, people were buying like replicas of like the china that they ate on in the Titanic, and like it was kind of they had like these big museum recreations of the Titanic, like you could walk through the Titanic, like parts of the Titanic and stuff.
You get that battle damaged Titanic playset with the Rose and Jack action figures.
Okay, I think we've said enough about this. Chris, what else have you been watching?
So Shudder has this really great documentary right now called Horror Noir, and it's all about the history of black horror. It's about African Americans and horror, and the history stretching all the way back to the start of film, and it's really good. It's I know a lot about horror. I'm not going to go so far as to say like I'm an expert, but I know a lot about horror, and this movie like taught me things or put things in context that I really didn't know before. And I love when a documentary does that. I love when a film documentary does that instead of just, telling me stuff I already know. Like, just as an example, everyone knows, Night of the Living Dead, it was a big deal that George Romero cast, a black guy as the lead like that. And I had always known that, but I always thought of it in terms of like trivia, like that's an interesting thing that happened. And this movie, it really puts it in context because it goes through every decade up to that film, and when you get there you realize what a huge deal it was for him to do that, even though Romero has always used to say like he wasn't thinking about that when he cast the role, but it really puts it in context, and it reveals how just like important it was. And the movie, it goes all the way up to, like Get Out, which is like, the biggest recent black horror movie. And, if you're a fan of horror in general, I would really recommend watching this because it's really good and it's really informative.
Where can people find this?
This is now streaming on Shudder, the horror streaming service, which everyone should have because it's like $5 a month and it's great.
And our own Marissa Mirabal wrote a longer review for the site, which we'll link in the show notes. It's also very good.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm not a fan of that title, Horror Noir, because it reminds me of the rural juror from 30 Rock.
I didn't think of that, but that's funny. And finally, I watched the new Robin Hood with that guy. What's his name? Taron Egerton and Jamie Foxx. And I will say this movie isn't as awful as I thought it would be, but it's really stupid and really strange. Like it blends all these eras, which I just don't understand why they did it, because it's clearly set in the past, but it's like the Flintstones where it's in the past, but everyone has really modern stuff under different names. And it's like, why is this movie like this? And all the clothes are really modern. Like Maid Marian shows up and she's clearly wearing like a leather jacket from H&M, and it's like, why is she doing that when this is like medieval England? It's so strange. And some of the action is surprisingly good, like the bow and arrow stuff, which is actually done practically, like it's not all CGI. It's really Taron Egerton like firing bows and arrows. Like it looks surprisingly cool, but as a film, it's very stupid, and I almost think you should watch it just to see how strange that era blending is, because it's never explained. They just do it, and it makes for a very strange viewing experience. Like there are guys who have like crossbows that fire bows like they're like machine gun bullets, and nothing like that has ever existed. And I just don't understand what's going on in this film.
That description of it makes me want to see it more than any of the marketing I saw for the movie.
I'm telling you, if this ever shows up on Netflix, this is like the perfect, like, put it on in the background Netflix movie.
Cool. Brad, what have you been watching?
Last week, I went to a press screening for Isn't It Romantic? The new romantic comedy directed by Todd Strauss-Schulson, who directed The Final Girls a little while back. And funnily enough, it's a kind of a similar premise as The Final Girls. If you haven't seen that movie, which you should go out of your way to do that, it's a movie about a girl who gets stuck in the world of a horror movie and has to figure out how to get out of it. It's a movie that her mother was in when she was younger, and it's just a very cool approach to the horror genre and slasher tropes. It's funny, it's stylish, it's very cool. And Todd does the same thing with this movie, where he takes Rebel Wilson and she gets stuck in the world of a dreamy romantic comedy where it plays out all the various tropes of the romantic comedy genre. And it's actually really good. It's very lighthearted and funny. As somebody who doesn't normally like Rebel Wilson in anything more than small doses as a supporting role, she's actually really good in this movie. She's very charming. She's funny. She's not over the top. Liam Hemsworth, specifically in this movie, is hilarious. This is the first time he's ever broken out and really done comedy like this. Chris Hemsworth has mostly been the Hemsworth brother doing the funny stuff. He is such a goober and a cheeseball in this movie, and he was cracking me up throughout the whole thing. It's a breezy movie. It does some interesting things, with the romantic comedy genre that subverts expectations a little bit. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it's a cool approach to this kind of movie.
And HT, you also saw this film?
Yeah, I was intrigued by Brad's warm words for this movie, so I went to see it yesterday. I'm not reviewing it, but I wanted to check it out. And I enjoyed this a lot, too. This is, like Brad said, it's kind of lightweight. It's a little bit shallow sometimes in the way that it tackles these rom-com tropes, but I'm all about those deconstructions of the rom-com in any flavor. This is something that actually Crazy Ex-Girlfriend did not just 2 weeks ago. And while the show did it slightly better, this is a really well done, just kind of entertaining fluff of a film. And I think that Rebel Wilson was really charming in it. And Liam Hemsworth it was really refreshing to see him play that, self-deprecating, like, humor type of role, just like not afraid to make fun of himself. And I feel like he was kind of taking cues from his brother in a lot of senses. So it was fun to see that. And I liked it quite a bit. And it does think that it is a little smarter than it is, but I found that it wasn't malicious in the way that it approached rom-com tropes, despite at the beginning kind of listing off all of the tropes in a very CinemaSins type of way. So I'm like, oh, this is what's wrong with it. This is why this genre is wrong. And I was like, okay, it's fine. I don't really care about that. Like, the people who are going to see this movie are the people who love rom-coms and want to see it sent up in some way that still feels, like it loves the genre. And I did think at the end that it did kind of have a good approach to that, and did love the genre in general. So it's a good film, and a fun film to see for Valentine's Day, which is coming up this week.
So this is something you'd recommend to see in theaters?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really fun. And I don't know about you, HT. I can't get Liam Hemsworth saying, "You're quite beguiling, aren't you?" out of my head, because he says it so many times.
It was great. Yeah, like Rebel Wilson's one-liners too, whenever she kind of does a little commentary about the tropes that are playing out, are always great because they're very understated, which was really refreshing too, because I felt like this could have been very in your face, and in some cases it was, but the way that she kind of takes it down is really fun. Like when he says, "You're quite beguiling" many times, she's like, is that the first word? Like, did you just learn the meaning of that word? Because he keeps saying it.
Yeah, we actually have an interview coming up with Todd Strauss-Schulson coming up on the site on Wednesday, I believe, where he talks about the extremely extensive preparation he did for the movie, and a bunch of really interesting deep dives into just romantic comedy as a genre and the movie. So make sure you keep an eye out for that.
Very cool. Last week on this podcast, I talked about seeing the Lego Movie 2. I was surprised at how much I loved it. Brad, you were the only other person that has seen this movie. What did you think?
I really liked it too. I'm honestly kind of surprised and a little flabbergasted that people are being kind of down on it. I feel like it delivers more of the same in the best way possible. It's not quite as good as the original Lego Movie, but I think it's only because that shine of how original the first Lego Movie was has worn off a little bit. You know, we know what kind of humor we're getting. You know, the meta approach to the world and the comedy itself, and then the live action element isn't a surprise. They even reveal really like how it's unfolding throughout the movie rather than being a surprise at the end, since we know what's going on. And I just feel like it does this really interesting thing of using the Lego world to fantastically represent the struggle that a brother and sister have as they're growing up, as the brother is maybe getting a little bit older, turning into a bit more of kind of a teenage jerk, and the younger sibling just wants to play with their older sibling and just have fun and play in the Lego world that they've created. And it's just, I thought it was really clever, and I still think it's very funny. The animation again is really cool. I'm always kind of in awe of how they bring the world to life in Lego form, because it looks so detailed, and it never looks like an artificial Lego world. It always looks like it was actually built with Legos in motion. So yeah, I really like the sequel a lot. I wish more people were going to see it. It's kind of a bummer that it's not doing as well at the box office as analysts thought it would, because I really think that it's great.
I feel like the marketing just didn't sell it as well as... I mean, I'm not sure what you could have done to sell it better, but I feel like I just felt like the marketing made it look like it was just a cash grab sequel, and this really has some clever, interesting things about it. But what else did you watch, Brad?
I watched 4 Weddings and a Funeral for the first time recently. I had never seen it before, so this was it felt like a good thing to watch. My girlfriend hadn't seen it in a long time, and Valentine's Day is coming up, so in that romantic comedy mood, and it's fantastic. It's one of those classic British romantic comedies. It's comes from Simon Curtis, who's behind Love Actually, and you can tell like his style is very much there. Is it Simon Curtis or Richard Curtis? Am I saying the name wrong?
Richard Curtis.
Richard Curtis, sorry. So yeah, Richard Curtis, and it's very much in that same vein of Love Actually. I think this is actually better, but I will say my complaint with this one, and spoilers, I guess, if you haven't seen 4 Weddings and a Funeral, even though it's like 25 years old at this point, I don't like how the relationship between Hugh Grant and Andie MacDowell plays out throughout this movie, because it's painted as like, oh, like they're meant for each other, but like Andie MacDowell's character is adulterous and sneaky, and like just she cheats on her husband. And sure, you could say like some relationships are spawned from infidelity, but like she leads Hugh Grant on, and you just don't do that to Hugh Grant. So I don't know. This just, yeah, it felt really, I felt odd about it. As charming as it is, and as great as the ensemble cast is, the romance at the core of it really just didn't sit too well with me.
I just love that you just don't do that to Hugh Grant.
Has anybody else seen 4 Weddings and a Funeral? Does anybody else like have similar perspective or like disagree?
I have, unsurprisingly, although it's been a while since I've seen it, and I remember it being quite like very dry British humor, and I enjoyed that a lot because I felt like the romance actually wasn't at the forefront. It was more just kind of the shenanigans of this like group of friends and everything that kept happening. And I think I was distracted by how just charming and beautiful Andie MacDowell is to remember her being quite so mean to Hugh Grant. But I wouldn't be surprised if you were correct.
Andie MacDowell is undoubtedly alluring in this movie, and it is that charm that makes me feel kind of okay about it, but still not fully on board. But I think you are right about it really is about the group of friends and the relationships they have, and just the bond between them. And it did remind me of Notting Hill, because the ensemble that surrounds Hugh Grant in that movie also did elevate that romantic comedy just like this one did.
And Brad, what else did you watch?
And then I also watched Coldplay: A Head Full of Dreams, which is a career-spanning documentary about Coldplay, the famous British alternative band. And this is one of the coolest rock documentaries I've seen in a while. It's pretty basic because it charts their rise from their early days to today. But what made this one really special and cool is that they have a friend who is the director of this movie, and he has been friends with the band since a year before they became Coldplay. And so his perspective on this is, it's a little bit skewed because obviously he's friends with them, but he doesn't shy away from showing the real side of the band. And what's cool is, since he's been with them so long, he actually has all of this archive footage that has been shot since from before they were famous, from their college years when they first formed the band and were just like playing music randomly. All this like behind the scenes stuff. He's basically been documenting the band for their entire career. So the entire documentary is full of this great, intimate, personal footage of just them being friends and working on albums and behind the scenes of their tours. And it really makes it almost feel like it's a coming of age narrative about Coldplay. And it's so that there's a little bit of concert footage in there, but it's not a ton of concert footage. It's some stuff from their most recent tour before they have been taking a break a little bit after they released the album that the documentary is also titled A Head Full of Dreams. And it's just really cool. And Matt Whitecross is the director, who's been friends with them forever. And it's if you get a chance, check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. Peter, you might like to know that there are a couple Back to the Future references, because apparently one particular scene in Back to the Future was something that really inspired Chris Martin to want to be in a band when he was a kid.
Oh, very cool. Sounds like Minding the Gap last year had kind of that same situation of, being able to use intimate footage that had been shot throughout the years because the director was kind of friendly with the group. So that I think would be, I'm not usually a fan of music documentaries, but that seems like something that might be of interest to me. But HT, what have you been watching?
I also, in addition to watching Isn't It Romantic, I saw What Men Want, which was a bigger disappointment to me. This was the gender-bent version of What Women Want, this time starring Taraji P. Henson as a woman who hits her head, which seems to be a more common thing with romantic comedies and comedies in general these days. And learns that she can hear the thoughts of all men. And she uses this to her advantage to get ahead in her career and try to break into the elite boys club that is kind of dominating her sports agency firm. And this is a film that it was very crass, broad humor, which is something that I'm not very particular to already, but I feel like the premise itself was something that isn't really made to be a modern day adaptation. It's from a 2000 film, and it feels very much of that time. And I felt like it struggled to adapt that sort of premise to a modern day story without resorting to all of these stereotypes and broad archetypes of the genre. And I felt like the film itself was just very flat and kind of missed the mark in terms of like the female empowerment that it was trying to put forward. And I wasn't a fan. Taraji P. Henson was doing her best, and she was really giving it her all in this film, but it was not good. I also wrote a review for it, and you can find it on slashfilm.com. The next film I saw was this Netflix film called Dear X, and this is a Taiwanese film that's kind of a LGBT / coming of age / family dramedy, and it's about a teenager whose father dies of cancer, and his father leaves the insurance payout to his former gay lover while leaving his wife and son totally out of that out of the insurance. So the teen's mom gets into like this huge conflict with the gay lover, and it is a little bit precious sometimes. This film is kind of a sort of an indie, kind of quirky approach to something that is a conflict that is very little bit over the top sometimes, but it's kind of gets very zany, but it does surprisingly, as it unfolds, have quite a sweet and moving heart to it. And I recommend this. This was a film that kind of surprised me, and I really enjoyed. It's on Netflix, and it's directed by newcomer director Shu Chien. It's quite good. And another film I watched was Beautiful, which is the Alejandro Inarritu film starring Javier Bardem that was, I think, an Oscar winner. It was not, but it was an Oscar nominee. It was nominated for 2 Oscars, including Best Foreign Language and Best Actor for Javier Bardem back in 2011. And it follows Javier Bardem as a career criminal who discovers that he has cancer, and he tries to he only has a few months left to live, and he kind of tries to wrap up his affairs and leave something to his 2 children, and it gets quite bleak and very just devastating towards the end, but it's just kind of this moving portrait of humanity that Javier Bardem delivers so phenomenally. He is just a powerhouse in this film. And this one is on Hulu. This was also Alejandro González Iñárritu's first Spanish language film since his debut feature Amores Perros. Okay. So that was really interesting to see him kind of back in that field. And it's a really moving, just devastating portrait of humanity and kind of that interrogation of morality and mortality at the same time. And a movie that I rewatched. These are all kind of in for my pop culture imports column that I write every 2 weeks. And so this is a one that I rewatched that I saw when I was a kid. I actually owned the DVD to it, and this is Astérix et Obélix Mission Cléopâtre. This is a film based off of the popular French comic book strip Astérix and Obélix. They're a staple of French pop culture, and they're incredibly prevalent characters that I think the closest comparison to American culture is probably like the Peanuts gang, for example. They're hugely just prevalent. And this is a live action film. This is actually the sequel that stars Gerard Depardieu in a fat suit of all things. And he does this twice in 2 films. I was not aware of the first film, but this is the only film of this series that I saw. And I had the DVD to this when I was a kid because my parents were raised on French culture. They had all of these Astérix and Obélix comic books that they kind of lent down to me, and I tried reading them despite having a very minimal knowledge of French. And they bought this for me when we were in France when I was young. And this DVD did not have subtitles when I watched it, so a lot of it was just kind of basing off of my knowledge of French when I was young, and then kind of like learning from context. This is my first time watching it with subtitles, so I wanted to see if it would hold up. And I can't say this is a great movie. It's definitely very bonkers and weird and absurdist and kind of insulting and offensive in some points. I think Monica Bellucci stars as Cleopatra in this, and the film just like takes every advantage to put her in the more and more skimpy outfits. At one point, she's like in this dress when she turns around and like half her butt is showing, and I'm like, how did I watch this as a child? But it's hilarious and just kind of gonzo and all over the place, and features just like dance sequences, ridiculous just like events and shenanigans, and just like these cartoonish antics. And I really enjoyed seeing this again, and just kind of revisiting a film that I had watched when I was a kid and hadn't fully understood, and now could watch with full understanding of what was happening.
Very cool. Ben, you've been watching a lot this week.
I have. I'll blitz through these pretty quickly. A bunch of old stuff. I watched The Public Enemy for the first time. This is the 1931 movie directed by William A. Wellman that stars James Cagney. And I think this may have been the first James Cagney movie that I've ever seen, which is sort of shameful considering how big of a star he was and how big of a presence he was in American cinema in that era. But I'm very much looking forward to diving into his filmography because he is magnetic in this movie. I mean, this is it's a gangster movie, basically. It's about him and his friend who sort of rise through the ranks and become like the gangsters in Chicago, the gangsters of the city, basically. And it's a pre-code movie, so it's one of those films that's supposed to sort of have a moral to the story. And like for example, the movie ends with excuse me, this like a almost like a postscript, like a text that pops up on the screen that says, "The public enemy is not a man, nor is it a character. It is a problem that sooner or later we, the public, must solve." So like Warner Brothers at the time was trying to not glorify the actions of these characters because they look so cool, and Cagney in particular looks so cool, like, you know, basically during Prohibition, like running alcohol and like just doing cool gangster shit the whole time, you know.
Is this, I just wanted to ask, is this a pre-code film?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't know much about that period of Hollywood, but I was doing a little bit of reading about it after watching this movie, and I need to look into this more because it's really fascinating. I sort of know about it in broad strokes in terms of like stuff that I learned in 101 level film classes that sort of just give a very brief layout of the history. But yeah, this is one of those movies that sort of falls in that weird period where the
Hays Code.
Yes, the Hays Code, and like Hollywood was regulated, very stringently with like what you could show and what you couldn't and all of that. And this is like right on the cusp of that. But anyway, I would recommend it, especially because it's only 83 minutes, and if you've never seen James Cagney do his thing, this is like a pretty solid gangster movie. So that's called The Public Enemy. I think it is available. I just looked it up it's on iTunes right now, so you can check it out there. I also watched The Woman in the Window, and the reason I did this because we were talking about this in the Slack, I think last week. There's a popular book that came out, I think it was last year, called The Woman in the Window, and a movie is coming out in October of this year that is based on this book, and it stars Amy Adams and Brian Tyree Henry and Gary Oldman. Wyatt Russell is in it, Anthony Mackie, and I was like, oh, cool. They're remaking this old Fritz Lang classic film noir movie from 1944. That's awesome. I'm going to go back and watch the original. So it turns out they are not doing that. They are not remaking this old movie. There's a separate movie called The Woman in the Window that's coming out this year. But I watched the one from 1944 that is directed, like I said, by Fritz Lang, who is famous for directing movies like M. And this one is not nearly as stylish as that. And he also directed Metropolis. It's not... It's a very like by the numbers sort of film noir movie. It stars Edward G. Robinson and Joan Bennett. He is like a sort of a regular professor type of guy, just like your average Joe, who gets sucked into this femme fatale's web of murder and deception. Although the femme fatale in this movie is not nearly as deceptive or like interesting as somebody like Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity or something like that. It's very basic in terms of like what actually happens in the story. The ending is terrible. The ending of this movie, I want to ruin it for everyone just to sort of like have you guys all shake your heads in disbelief that what the hell is going on in the ending of this movie. But I'm not going to do that. So if you are planning on checking out The Woman in the Window later this year, just know that it's not a remake of this 1944 movie. I still, that being said, it's a pretty decent movie. It's just, I don't know if I can fully recommend it because of the way it just sort of craps the bed at the very end. So that I'm not sure I saw that on TCM, Turner Classic Movies, so I'm not sure where that is available right now, but it's called The Woman in the Window. Next, I watched To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which came out last summer, I think, and sort of blew up on Netflix. I think probably everybody on this podcast has talked about it at this point, but I just was very, very late getting to this. I was looking for something, my wife and I were looking for something fun and light to watch, and threw this on, and it is indeed fun and light and really very good. And I want to see more of Lana Condor, who is the star in this. She's great. I was very surprised that this movie is directed by a woman. Susan Johnson directed it, and I shouldn't be surprised, but just because, when that popped up at the very end, like directed by Susan Johnson, I was like, oh wow, a woman directed this. Like, that's such a refreshing thing. It's just it shouldn't be that rare, where I actually have like a visceral reaction to being surprised that a woman directed a movie, especially a good movie. So,
that's going to happen a lot more, hopefully.
I hope so, yes. And hopefully my surprise will decrease each time. But yeah, Lana Condor and Noah Centineo are very charming in this movie. In the film, one of the characters mentions 16 candles, and they talk about one of the opening scenes, opening images in that movie, which is where like two characters are walking hand in hand, or they actually have their hands in the back pockets of their significant others as they're walking through a high school. And my wife and I both realized that neither one of us had ever seen 16 Candles, and that was also streaming on Netflix. So we just rolled right in. We just did a double feature, and I wish we would have watched 16 Candles first, because To All the Boys I Loved Before is a way better movie. And I know that a lot of people are probably like screaming right now because you grew up with 16 Candles. It's a John Hughes classic from the 80s. And people have like, heavy nostalgia for it. Because I'd never seen it before, I didn't have any of that. I like John Hughes a lot. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is one of my favorite movies ever. This one is a huge miss for me. I think Molly Ringwald and the guy who plays Jake Ryan, I don't know what his character's or what the actor's name is. I'm frantically scanning the page for it and can't see it right now. Michael Schofiling, I've never heard of that actor. They don't have any chemistry, and their characters, like, I don't buy the love story between them at all in this movie. It's very much like she's pining for this rich jock kid who doesn't know that she exists. And I just don't buy the central relationship that the movie is sort of like the foundational relationship of the film. Anthony Michael Hall plays this sort of he's like a supporting kid. He's like a geek who has sort of has a thing for Molly Ringwald's lead character, but he's super annoying. And like, this movie gets into, first of all, Long Duck Dong comes from this film, and we could have an entire podcast about that. I just want to say that's like an embarrassment and a stain on American cinema. And then so I'll just leave it at that. But there's also like some weird date rapey stuff going on in this movie. I would just say, if you loved 16 Candles when you were growing up, maybe don't rewatch it, because I don't think it holds up very well at all. And there's really like almost no redeeming value to this movie. I realize that sounds harsh, but I don't know if have any of you seen 16 Candles recently?
I have, if you can notice from my sounds that I'm making while you're talking about it.
So what do you think, HG?
Oh, sorry.
There is a frightening amount of like straight up sexual assault in this movie, and I'm not going to get into Long Duck Dong because he's just one of the worst caricatures of Asian people in general. And I think honestly this is probably the weakest Hughes movie for just how unlikable a lot of the characters are. And despite it having all those iconic romantic moments, all of them really do fall flat, just because you can't really believe that these characters would in any way like each other or get along. So I remember watching this and being very excited I was in like my John Hughes phase and being very excited to dive into it and being left with a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, no, it's definitely dated now, and there are things in it that don't work that, were more appropriate at the time or not looked down upon. And so, but I still think that it does have some redeeming qualities, but it is probably the most, I guess, egregiously offensive of John Hughes' movies as far as time not being too kind to it as the movie has gotten older. It's, especially the Long Duck Dong character, which is just, it's real bad.
Yeah, and even like the soundtrack, which John Hughes is normally pretty good about having like kick-ass soundtracks. The music was just pretty forgettable in this movie. So anyway, yeah, it was a big miss for me. And then finally, I watched Escape at Dannemora. I think I talked about that in a recent Water Cooler episode. I finished that show. That's available on Showtime. You can check that out there. I liked this series a lot more as it went on. I thought it started out a little slow, but as it got toward the end, the filmmaking improved. Ben Stiller's direction, I thought, got a lot better. I left the show being very impressed with Ben Stiller, who directed all of 7 episodes of this. The performances, I mean, Paul Dano is really good. Benicio del Toro is certainly doing something in this show. There is one, I think it's the ending of episode 4. He delivers a line in such an over-the-top dramatic way. He is staring at Patricia Arquette and says, like, "Don't tell anybody." And I'm like, my wife and I had like a 10-minute debate about whether or not that moment was in Benicio del Toro's contract. If he was like, "I will take this role only if I get to do one moment in this entire series any way that I want, and you can't stop me," because that is the only way. Like, I don't understand how everything else in the series is so grounded, and that moment just stands out as like, what the fuck is going on? It does feel like has experienced that.
Yeah, it does feel like they gave him like, can you do 30 line readings of this line, and we're gonna choose the weirdest and most odd one to include.
It is so weird.
Ben, I have a question for you, inspired by that statement. I was having a very similar conversation during my Game of Thrones rewatch with my wife about Aidan Gillen, who plays Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, on that show. And I think Benicio del Toro and Aidan Gillen belong in the subcategory of actors who are undeniably good actors, who never phone it in, are never bad, but always make the weirdest goddamn choices.
Yeah, it seems like they just have to do something extra to keep themselves entertained, like making the movie. That's the only thing that I can really attribute it to. I don't know. But yes, I totally see that connection between those two. And man, I love I love Aidan Gillen's performance in freaking Game of Thrones. And then just really quickly, Escape at Dannemora. I think, Peter, you probably mentioned this, but there is, I think it's the 6th episode of the series. There are some incredible one-shot, oneers in this show. Not only the opening one, which sort of tracks the full escape of the escape route that these prisoners have to take, but after that, just like sort of a more casual conversation between two characters. It's sort of like a sneaky, like a stealthier one shot that is almost impressive, as impressive, just in a different type of way. It reminded me of like an old, I don't know, like M. Night Shyamalan used to do that a lot, where he would have a long, unbroken just conversations and lets full scenes play out. And I thought that Ben Stiller just, I obviously the performances, Patricia Arquette and Paul Dano are great. Benicio del Toro we talked about, but I left Escape at Dannemora really with a newfound respect for Ben Stiller as a filmmaker. So that's what I've been watching.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend. I think Escape at Dannemora was my second favorite TV show of last year, and there's just like the way Ben Stiller films it, and it's presented in 2.35 widescreen, which is odd for a TV show. You never really see a TV show at that widescreen, and he does like these very interesting like wide shots that almost feel like a 70s film, where it's like super ultra wide and like zoom in as the characters are like walking across like a vista of something.
Yeah, it was like Francis Ford Coppola in The Conversation. That's what that reminded me of.
Yeah. No, I really dug this, and I agree it does get better as it goes on. But Patricia Arquette's performance is just amazing. Anyways, let's move on to what we've been eating. Jacob, how has the diet been going?
Very good. It's much harder to diet when you don't have your significant other around. You get bored and you want to eat garbage. It's been a very, very, very hard week, but I stuck to it. If you follow me on Twitter or on Instagram, you saw that I posted a photo where I've officially retired my first gold shirt. I fit into it. I can wear it out in public now without looking like I'm wearing a too small of a shirt. So I moved on to gold shirt number 2. So things are moving forward. Also, I discovered a restaurant in Austin called Dos Patos that makes a tortilla entirely out of cheese. It does not taste like a tortilla at all. It tastes like cheese. But what they do is they flatten out cheese on a griddle. They make it just crispy enough that it solidifies, but not so crispy that it crunches. And they wrap all of your usual chicken and whatnot inside of it without any carbohydrates. And even though it does not taste like tortilla, the textural difference ended up being really satisfying, especially after I discovered that their beef is terrible, but their chicken is very good. And actually, I'm a weirdo, so I now I'm trying to buy Dos Patos tacos and take them to another restaurant that has better guacamole and salsa and eating it there instead. Because Dos Patos salsa also leaves a lot to be desired. But, it's at this point in the diet, finding a new thing to eat that, is a nice change of pace is a good thing. And I'm hoping to find more like it in the months ahead.
And I'm not sure if you've seen this, Jacob, but if you go to like a big grocery store that has like lots of selections, there is like a low carb tortilla that is generally sold at like those bigger grocery stores. I think it's like 3 or 4 carbs per a tortilla, and it's a little smaller of a tortilla than normal. But
I've had those. I don't like them. I guess I've never liked packaged tortillas. My tortillas need to be warm and freshly made, or I reject them. I've tried so many times to like those low carb tortillas, and I can't get behind them.
Fair enough. Brad, what kind of interesting and sugary things have you been eating this week?
Yes, unfortunately, to torture the keto members of the Slash Film team, I got my hands on new fudge-covered Oreos and Nutter Butters. So around wintertime, they always re-release the white fudge Oreos it's usually just a holiday thing that they're around temporarily. But now they've released just regular fudge chocolate-covered Oreos and also the Nutter Butters to go along with it. And it should come as no surprise that they're really good. Obviously, you've probably been able to get chocolate-covered Oreos at various chocolate shops and things like that. It's kind of a normal thing. But this is the first time you'll be able to get them like in a store officially from Nabisco, and they're both fantastic. The Nutter Butters I actually like a little bit more than the Oreos, but the Oreos themselves are good just simply because it's the classic Oreo covered in chocolate. It does make me want some of the other flavors of Oreos to be covered in chocolate, which is something I'd probably have to do myself by like getting out a fondue fountain or something like that. Like specifically the s'mores Oreos I think would be amazing if they were covered in chocolate, but that's just me having a really unhealthy daydream.
Yeah, you're going to have to work for that, Brad.
And then back on my cereal grind, I tried 2 new versions of Frosted Flakes. They have Honey Nut Frosted Flakes now, and also Banana Cream Frosted Flakes. And the Honey Nut Frosted Flakes are apparently a new regular thing, so I don't think they'll be going away anytime soon, so keep an eye on them for your grocery store. The Banana Cream ones are a limited edition one. The Honey Nut ones are pretty good. They mostly taste just like the flakes in Honey Bunches of Oats, but a little bit, a little bit sweeter. And then the Banana Cream Frosted Flakes, they're not bad. I'm torn on whether or not like the artificial banana flavor here actually works. It's a similar taste to whenever you have like a banana flavored candy, like banana Laffy Taffy or something like that. It's still pretty good. I actually would like to try it mixed with like a fruity cereal or something like that, like something like a I don't know, like a strawberry Rice Krispies or something like that, which is something else new that I have that I'll be trying at some point. They're both pretty good in their own way. They're still not as good as the Lucky Charms Frosted Flakes crossover that you can still get in stores, which has Frosted Flakes with the Lucky Charms marshmallows. That's still a top notch. That is probably the best thing Frosted Flakes has done in a while.
It is weird that they cannot get the banana taste to taste more natural. I remember as a kid, I used to, outside of like the grocery store, they would have like one of those, machines that you put a quarter in and you get some candy and it would have runts. And I would always have to throw out the like banana runts because they always tasted like that fake banana taste. Even though I like normal bananas, I don't like candy bananas. So, yeah. Anyways, let's move on to what we've been playing. I, this weekend, had a board game day. We played some Keyforge, which I've already talked about on this podcast. But we also played a new game, a new tabletop miniature board game called Nemesis. And this is basically the board game version of the Alien movie franchise without the license. The setup is that you're playing a crew of a spaceship who has awoken from hibernation, and an emergency procedure states that there is a critical system failure and there are quote-unquote intruders on board the ship. The goal of the crew is you each actually have your own goal, so it's a cooperative game. You're working together to try to survive and maybe get to Earth or whatever, but everybody has kind of like their own goal, kind of like Dead of Winter or whatever. So it's semi-co-op. And you got to find out what's causing this failure and, safely return to Earth. It's very thematic. The spaceship is dynamically created with tiles, so you're kind of exploring the spaceship, hoping not to run into aliens. Everywhere you go, you can cause noise, which is more of a chance that you'll run into aliens. But there's, you have a dead body. One of the people has been killed, obviously, from like a chest burster. And you can if you can get that body to like the science lab, you can, investigate and help discover, how to tackle these aliens. There's like a ton of stuff. There's actually, I posted a photo of this on my Instagram stories, and I got a ton of people responding like, that looks complicated. It is kind of complicated. It is a medium weight game in terms of board games, but there's a lot. I think it took like an hour to like set up and learn. So it is a little bit complex, and it has a lot of miniatures that are cool and basically look like aliens. Like, I don't know how this game isn't sued by 20th Century Fox, but it was fun. I'll play it again, and that is called Nemesis. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, what we've been playing, is a podcast I discovered. I think I mentioned this last week on the podcast in passing, but I discovered this podcast called Podcast The Ride. Jacob, is this anything you've ever heard of before?
No, the moment I saw it on the doc, I looked it up and immediately subscribed because it sounds like my kind of podcast.
Oh, it's totally your type of podcast. If you like theme parks, if you have nostalgia for going to theme parks as a kid, this group of people, and they have guests, I think, every week or every so often, they basically record a podcast. I think it's like about 2 hours an episode, and they'll just be discussing one ride. So, like, I think the latest episode is The Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, which was it was a motion 3D ride that was at Universal Studios when it first opened, and before that it was Muppet Vision 3D, although they do actually talk about real rides and not just 3D films. But it's interesting because it's a mix of information. Like, they give you a lot of insight into the creation of the rides. They talk about with the Muppet Vision 3D, they talk a lot about what was going on with the Muppets and Disney at those times, giving you historical context. But I think what makes it great is it's just a hilarious group of, it feels like your friends, having a nostalgic chat about this, thing that they all loved, and talking about their favorite parts and stuff like that. Jacob, I think you would really dig it, and I'm excited to see what you think of Podcast The Ride. I will link it in the show notes. What have you been playing, Jacob?
All the time I spent not watching movies this past week, I spent playing video games. I beat Resident Evil 2, the remake, again, because when you beat it, you unlock a secondary run mode with the other character, because you choose one character out of two to start the game with. And when you beat it one time, you unlock the alternate version, which is sort of meant to be taking place at the same time as your first playthrough with the other character. So I played it again, and it was very good again, and I want to play it again. It's that good. It's that solid of a game, and that confident and scary and thrilling. And I hope that Capcom either remakes more of the Resident Evil games in this style because it's so successful, or even better, they make more new Resident Evil games that go after this tone, because I feel like they've nailed what makes Resident Evil great in a modern era with this remake. It's perfect. It's a straight up perfect game. I have no complaints about it. But after beating that again, I still had that horror itch, so I decided to play State of Decay 2 on Xbox One, which is a game about surviving the zombie apocalypse, except that's not just shooting and killing tons of zombies. It's about playing as a group of characters. You can rotate between them, all different strengths, weaknesses, and backgrounds. You have to go out and find supplies, to go out and scavenge and explore and meet other survivors and manage your base back home. And you want to build more comfortable beds. You want to build a little clinic area to cure people. You want to build areas and make ammunition. It's very much if someone took The Sims, but set it in the zombie apocalypse and lets you control the characters directly to go fight zombies. It's very, very heavy. Like, if you want to play a game that's just about killing zombies in combat, you just hit X a whole bunch. I mean, on the Xbox controller, it is not thrilling combat. It's not thrilling shooting. It doesn't even handle that great. It's a simulation game. It's about putting people in a zombie apocalypse and trying to make best of what you can find and use your resources to manage your household and make sure your survivors are happy, healthy, and alive. And it's good. I was enjoying it. I played a few hours of it. But really, all it made me want to do is play XCOM 2 again. And XCOM 2 may be my favorite game of all time. If you look at my Steam page, I have put well over 200 hours in XCOM 2, playing it and replaying it. This is a game where you play as the leader of a group of rebels attempting to overthrow the aliens who have taken over Earth and have sort of solidified their control over it. And the game is all about commanding the larger war, where you're flying your ragtag rebels around the globe, finding resources, building new things on your base, managing your money, training soldiers, recruiting soldiers, research and technology, building the proper equipment. And then when you get into fights, the camera goes onto the ground. You do turn-based combat as you control your small squad of soldiers fighting through battles. And it is intensely stressful. It is incredibly stressful in all the right ways, because in the fights you want to take these big risks, but if somebody dies in the game, they're dead for good. I mean, like, if your best soldier misses his shot, you put him in a bad position, he gets shot by an alien, he's gone. You do not get your guys back. So it's a game where it's possible to lose. You can literally reach a point in XCOM 2 where you, even after hours and hours and hours, you have lost the game. Your soldiers are dead. You're out of money. This alien closes in and kill you. So even though I've beaten it, I've been trying to play with all the DLCs from the past few years, which adds a lot more missions, makes it harder. And so once again, I fall into an XCOM 2 hole. It is a game that I think I'll be playing for literally the rest of my life. And no other game has dominated me quite like XCOM 2. I'm looking forward to hopefully booting it up again tonight. I also picked up a game called Root, which is a new-ish board game. It sold out its first printing. It's back in print, I believe. I put a picture of it on my Instagram because it has the best art I've ever seen in a board game. It is adorable and also just kind of detailed and amazing. The premise of Root is that the forest is at war with all the cats dominate the forest. And meanwhile, everyone else plays as either the birds, the former kingdom who dominated the forest, trying to fight back. The various smaller animals who have bound together to fight back as well, as like a rebel force. Someone plays a single raccoon who's trying to take advantage of the chaos to get what he needs. The expansion adds a lizard cult who are trying to take over the region, and a beaver business who are trying to capitalize on the war to make money and become merchant kings. So it's this actually medium to heavyweight war game full of lots of moving parts and pieces, but all these really adorable animals instead of like soldiers and knights or like people wielding guns. It's just cats and raccoons and birds. And I'm learning the rules right now. It's complex because every single side plays completely differently. It's asymmetrical, so that in order to teach the game, I have to know how every single side of the game plays, and then everybody else has to learn their side and how they interlock. So the game is going to be very hard to teach.
Yeah. So that's to explain that to people who haven't played board games. That's the equivalent of not just learning one board game, but learning 4 different board games. Yeah,
exactly. It reminds me of probably the classic example of asymmetrical board game is the card game Netrunner, which is a game of cyber hacking in the future, where it's only a 2-player game, but each side of Netrunner plays a completely different way. So in order to play one half Netrunner and then play the other, you have to learn 2 completely different systems to interlock. So in order to understand Root, you have to understand at least 4 systems, 2 more if you have the expansion. So it looks amazing. The art is absolutely incredible. I can't wait to play it, but learning it is a beast. Peter, have you played Root?
I have not. I own, I guess maybe, is it the predecessor? The game, I forget the name of it. It's a dungeon, and someone plays the dungeon, someone plays the dragon. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Goodness, I can't remember what that's called. It's a similar game. It's in the same style. I can't remember what it's called.
Future Peter here.
The game I was trying to think the name of is actually called Vast: The Crystal Caverns. Yeah, it's very asymmetrical, like where everybody is playing like a completely different game, and I have not gotten that to the table because of the same problem thing you're encountering. Okay, Brad, what have you been playing?
I just recently played Magic: The Gathering for the first time ever. Everyone knows what Magic: The Gathering is, I assume. It's a card fantasy game. And it's something that I have never really been particularly interested in. I've always admired the artwork that I've seen on the cards, and I know that it has quite the rabid following, and people spend so much money on decks for this game. But it always just looked far too complicated to play, and I was just like, I don't need to take the time to learn this. But a friend of mine recently asked me if I'd wanted to come and play with them. They were getting together. And I was just like, you know what? Sure, why not? Let's see if I can get it. And it took a little while to get into, like watching a couple games and then having some guidance while playing. But I finally got into it, and it's pretty fun. It's not necessarily the kind of thing where I like it so much that I'll go out and start buying decks myself, because that seems like a pretty expensive hobby for me to get into at this point when I already am spending too much money on collecting other things that I don't need. So yeah, I will keep playing with them. Like they play usually like once a week. So I said, whenever I have time in my schedule and I can get together with them, I'll go and play. And they have plenty of decks to go around that are already put together that make it easy to jump in and play. And yeah, it was a pretty good time. And so I like Magic: The Gathering now, apparently.
Yeah, the expensive and time-consuming part of Magic: The Gathering really is in that, like, I want to build this deck that has, like, these kind of cards. So then you got to go out and buy blind packs and hope you get those cards and spend lots of money either, buying more expensive legendary cards that, are more rare and build your deck. So, Brad, if you're not involved in the whole deck building part of that equation, I think you'll be a lot happier.
Yeah, exactly. I'm down to just grab a deck that's already been built and just play with it and not worry about like trying to create this awesome deck with all these cool creatures and characters and blah blah blah.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's water cooler. This might be the longest water cooler of all time. Possibly. I don't know. We had a bunch of tech problems during this recording, so I'm not sure how long this is at this point, but you can find more of all the features that we talked about in the show notes. There's a bunch of reviews like Happy Death Day 2 and What Men Want and Ben's Shazam filmmakers and footage presentation thing, and also the horror noir thing, that documentary that Chris talked about. You can find the links to all those in the show notes. This podcast, Shazam Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your questions, comments, concerns, or life advice from Chris to peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page, rate and review us, tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter.
Jacob, we don't have time for this.
We do have time. It's the most important part of the show. I've been told this by many people, many listeners write me in secret to say, Jacob, we will never listen to the show again if you stop reading from the gargantuan book of insult, offense, and effrontery by Louis A. Safian at the end of each water cooler episode.
Are you sure they weren't saying, Jacob will never listen to the show again if you keep reading from this book?
Well, I have opened to the very last page of the book, page 406, from the nicknames section. All of you get new nicknames tonight, or today. Okay, Peter, they call you Pie because you have lots of crust.
Huh.
HT, they call you Plymouth Rock because you have a shape like a Plymouth and a head like a rock. Brad, they call you the pneumatic drill because you're such a bore.
Oh, boy.
Chris, they call him the radio station. Anyone can pick him up, especially late at night.
Rolls off the tongue, that nickname.
Ben, they call him River. The biggest part of him is his mouth.
Oh, Ben River Pearson. That's nice.
I want to point out real quick, at the end of this book, I've never seen this before, has a list of other books by the same publisher,
Oh no.
including 2,501 things that really pissed me off.
Oh boy.
A Freudian slip is when you say one thing but mean your mother.
Oh my god.
Oh no.
There was a young man from Nantucket, 1,001 lewd limericks.
Oh, you got to get that one and read those.
The Illustrated Dictionary of Snark, as well as the Snark Handbook Insult Edition.
Oh, that one you have to get.
And finally,
How many editions of the Snark Handbook are there?
Seriously.
5,001 side-splitting jokes and one-liners. Oh, it has some samples here. My granddad has the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban from the zoo.
That's actually funny.
Oh boy.
That's really good.
That's actually a good joke.
That's
Wow.
actually pretty good, yeah.
Schizophrenia. Together I can beat it.
Ah,
Yeah, okay, these are pretty good. These are pretty good.
Peter just left. Oh man.